It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
We're in the middle of our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly, and welcome to the program. We have a member of that assembly, State Representative Dan Sullivan, on the phone. He is commuting to Little Rock right now. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Paul, and I have pulled over to the side of the road, so I'm not using my phone illegally. I'm off the side here in Bald Knob, and I don't have my gun open carry either.
Oh,
so I'm in good
okay.
shape down here in Bald Knob.
I see what you're saying. I think that's great. There's been some positive things happening when it comes to recognition out of the House, passing that resolution saying that we're a constitutional carry state.
Yeah, and Paul, let me just share with people, especially in Northeast Arkansas, I know the NRA is having a big Friends of the NRA banquet coming up here in the next few days. I just recently let my NRA membership expire. The NRA, I feel like, did not treat the legislature, those of us who have been great advocates for the NRA, we kind of got it put to us last session. We try to follow what they do and listen to their counsel. And as a result of that, they gave me and a number of other legislators an A- rating. Through no fault of the legislatures, and I think the fault was with the NRA. And we had a pretty lengthy discussion with their representative and asked them to consider changing that rating, and they did not. So, Paul, I am letting my NRA membership expire, and I'll be going to the Gun Owners of America Association. I will not be attending the NRA banquet this year for the first time in quite a while. And I would just ask your listeners to consider what the NRA is doing in supporting our legislature, who's been strongly supportive of all gun rights.
Yeah. But yeah, what you referenced, Dan, I definitely saw some of that. I was scratching my head 2 years ago with what the NRA was allowing to happen, under the guise of Second Amendment, but it was actually more restrictions and more red tape. And the Gun Owners of America, they're no joke. They don't play around when it comes to understanding that the Second Amendment is what it is. It says what it says, and it's.
Paul,
go ahead.
Yeah, that blends in with Chris Ann Hall's being here in Arkansas this week. Just a fantastic series of meetings all around the state. And Paul, I'm going to read a short quote from Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." And that's exactly what Chris Ann Hall did this week. It's exactly what Patriots of 746 are doing. It's exactly what the Liberty Coalition is doing, is starting to inform people. And they're gaining a lot of support statewide for understanding what our constitutional rights are. And these groups of people are starting to meet small. It reminds me of the power the Tea Party had several years ago.
I agree.
And it's just so exciting. It's so exciting to hear people like Chris Ann talking about the Constitution, about these groups. And I don't know, what did 746 grow from 3 or 4, maybe 100 to 17 or 13,000 now?
Yeah, 17,000.
17,000. And it's really impactful. And it's exactly what Jefferson talked about. When people are uninformed, they're going to make wrong decisions. And it's about us helping educate the people rather than take their power away, which a central government will do, state or federal, and about educating the people so they understand what their powers and authorities are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're talking with State Representative Dan Sullivan. Okay, Dan, the highway plan, half of the highway plan that includes tax increases on gas and diesel at the wholesale level, it sailed through the Senate last week, and it's expected to go through the House this week. Can you give us your thoughts on the plan?
Sure, and I'll be glad to, and I appreciate the question. right now I'm not going to be able to support the tax increase for a couple of reasons. As I look at it, Paul, although bankruptcy is not exactly like a tax increase, they both fundamentally say that we have to tighten our belt first. If one declares bankruptcy or one is considering it, they have to go to the courts and the lawyers to decide on a plan to make sure you've tightened your belt first. Well, here, I think, and from my observations, there's a number of things that we haven't done, tightening our belt and looking at cost reductions before we go to the last resort of increasing taxes. Unfortunately, for our government, it seems like that's the path of least resistance. We think we can message this correctly, and the taxpayer will say, yeah, there's nothing else we can do. But when you're down in Little Rock and you're engaged in these things, you understand there's all kinds of ways that we can tighten our belt. Paul, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we had a whole year we went through with the federal government on what was called the Paris match, where we submit all of our Medicaid recipients to the feds, and they cross-match that with other people in other states. It turned out that we had what DHS said was a glitch. And when I dug into what a glitch meant, it turns out it was a lot more than just a glitch. It turns out we were paying $500 a month for about 10 to 12,000 people for about 9 to 12 months. Now, I don't know if your listeners have their phone handy or their calculator handy, but multiply 500 times 12 times 12. That's millions of dollars. And we had contractors that were supposed to be managing that for us. And those contractors, as far as I know, have not been held accountable for the loss of, even if you say, well, that wasn't all Arkansas money, it was some federal money, it was still the taxpayers' money. And I reach out, I think that calculates to above $60 million that the taxpayers pay. We look at other things that are coming down, and I know the governor and his staff have said that he's going to cut taxes and raise taxes and it's cost neutral. Well, that's probably true, and if you accept that as true, and I'll give him that, then we as legislators have to look at other taxes that are coming up. It's not just what's proposed here in this one. They're proposing a 911 tax on your cell phone.
Yep.
And truly our current 911 system is not what we need. We need to upgrade it. It's a safety issue. But the governor's tax plan that balances doesn't include that. Nor does it, at this time, I think, include the internet sales tax and other fees that we're looking at raising. And as a legislator, I can't just balance what the governor's tax plan is on highways as a standalone. I have to balance what all these fee increases, what all those taxes are at the end of the day. I know you've said a number of times that at the end of the session, are the taxpayers paying more or paying less? So it's not, you can't really make this highway tax plan just a standalone. You have to put them all together.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's kind of the path of least resistance is to increase that. Paul, I just found out the other day, and I don't know the details, and I'm very cautious about rolling this out, and I hope to come back on when I know the details. But, the taxpayer pays association dues for all state agencies. So now let that sink in just a minute. Mm-hmm. If you have a member of a state agency, DHS, or other state agencies, we are paying, and that would be for our colleges too, or universities, we are paying, taxpayers pay association dues to the tune of $6.7 million.
Wow.
Now let that soak in, and there may very well be some dues that we need and should pay. But most of your people in the private sector, they assume that cost if they join and pay for their association, their professional dues, they're paying that. But we at the state level are paying $6.7 million. And I think before I vote for a tax plan, I want to know just what it is we're paying.
Yeah.
And if we can cut that down to $2 million or $3 million, fine. But we need to look at all of those things before we take that path of least resistance and increase the taxes on the taxpayer.
We're talking with Dan Sullivan, State Representative for District 53. He's pulled over on the side of the road en route to Little Rock. You know, on the paying the association dues. I mean, that's what the biggest lobby down there is, government lobbying for government. It's these government associations and things like that. That's what struck me. You know, as you're down there long enough, and so you've always wondered maybe why. Well, if they're mandatorily, or if the taxpayers are paying for these individuals to be a member of these associations, I mean, that to me is. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, Dan.
I didn't either. But I'll tell you, I have never had a state agency lobby me. Matter of fact, they've taken great pains not to. If I ask a question, they'll inform me of, answer my questions for me, and they'll help me learn more. But I have not had, and this is my third term, not had a representative from the state agency, DHS, the governor's office, or anywhere. I've not had one come up and say, we really need your vote here, or really need your vote there. So, you know, I think I really want to look into this, though. I tell you, you just had the guest prior to me was talking about, you know, the gambling and the casino issue.
David Colbert.
Well, that's another one. Yeah, that's just another one that I have a hard time supporting. You know, we went through the whole deal with the tax on cigarettes, and we needed the money, we needed the revenue, so we taxed the vice. And we taxed the vice more, and we taxed the vice more. We finally bled it dry until we had the federal courts come out, you know, and we had all the smoking settlements and all of that. Now we've bled that dry. So then our next course of action is to find another vice to tax. And we'll tax it more and tax it more until we finally bleed that dry, and we'll have to find another vice to tax to keep up state revenues. I wonder what the next vice we'll tax is, because that seems to be, and you know, you quoted Chris Ann as saying, if we don't learn from the mistakes of history, we'll continue to make the mistakes. It's a mistake to leverage taxes on a vice as a foundational principle for funding highways. Now, if you want to tax them a little bit, fine. You know, we tax a lot of vices. We tax Twinkies and everything else. So if we're going to do that, I understand that, and I support that. However, to make it a fundamental principle and a foundational principle for funding our highways is not a long-term solution in my mind. So, you know, when I talk about I can't support the highway bill, it's not just one thing. It's not just being against taxes. It's because I believe we're fundamentally building on a foundation that isn't sustainable. And I believe that we have not done all that we can to tighten our belt before we pass that tax on to the people. Maybe if we tightened our belt, I would support a 1 cent tax or a 3 cent tax. But I think there's more that we can do to lower that tax on the people, and that we need to do before we just take, again, the path of least resistance, is convince the people there's a huge need out there, our crisis.
Yeah.
And admittedly, there's a big problem. I'll certainly admit that.
And the next vice, you were talking about the next vice, Dan, it's clearly marijuana. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
Or others. I mean, there are plenty of vices out there.
Yeah. Well, you raised some interesting points, Dan Sullivan. I mean, you really do, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your stance on not, wanting to raise taxes. You're not the first person that I have heard that is uncomfortable funding roads with casino revenue. Now, I mean, I know it makes great sense on paper, but after that interview with Mr. Colbert last hour, and you really understand the mental health aspects of gambling and the addictions that nobody ever talks about. I mean, he was a wealth of knowledge. You start thinking, hang on, wait a second. Yeah, we'll have better roads eventually because we're going to have the money, but at what cost? What cost what's the societal cost?
It's the same thing with tobacco. I mean, we put the tax up so high that people had to quit smoking, and when they quit, our revenues went down. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to tax, and then the lesson we learned from that is people got sick, and we had that cost also. And so now the lesson learned would be what? if we're going to tax the vice, we're going to tax it and create less of it, which means we have to increase the taxes on the vice to sustain the revenue levels, and eventually those revenue levels diminish or level out, and our costs don't.
Mm-hmm.
It just is not a foundational principle of taxing vices to create revenue. Is not a foundational principle.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, Dan, tell me about this Is it a resolution that you were backing and has to do with, is it pronounced Fong Gong? And,
yes, and
tell me about that.
Yeah, many of your people may have seen it. It's been on public television and other documentaries where it's a spiritual group in China primarily that are being imprisoned for their spiritual beliefs. And folks, they're not Christians. They wouldn't believe like you and I, probably nowhere close. However, in China, they're being put in prison, and because of their religion. And China is doing anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 organ transplants a year. Now, if you do that in the States, there's a tracking mechanism that tracks where the organs came from, where they're going. There's where it went, who did it, who did all the services. And China doesn't have any tracking like that. So they are imprisoning the Fong Gong and then harvesting their organs in order to sell them on the market. And then there's no tracking procedure. So you have people from all over the world going to China, getting these organs, being harvested primarily from these prisoners of conscience.
Wow.
And given to these folks as a revenue stream. And as a result of that, our U.S. Congress had a very similar resolution, almost the same one that we passed in Arkansas, that passed unanimously in the U.S. Congress, and it passed unanimously in the Arkansas House. So I was really, it started out like a lot of things do. You get a call as a legislator and saying, can you help us out? Would you meet with us? And I met with representatives of the Fong Gong, and again, we don't share religious beliefs at all, but we share a passion for life and the right to life.
Yeah.
And the right for people to have some, be able to have all the tracking that goes on here in the U.S. when these organs are harvested.
That's got to be a big business. That's got to be a big business. Let me ask you this. Yeah. You said it was unanimous. So you're saying Democrats supported a resolution condemning what's going on with the Fong Gong?
Correct. And it just seems a little bit, and I'm thankful for every time someone stands for life. I appreciate that vote. And it's just, I find it a little bit concerning that people would be opposed to harvesting an organ, but they're okay with harvesting a fetus. And I struggle with that a little bit. And again,
It's a hypocrisy.
Appreciate the support.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the support for this and hope that as a nation and as a state, we can grow. And it's really a step in the right direction, Paul, for people to recognize how important life is and how important that is. So it's a good step. And although it does seem to me a little bit hypocritical, it is a step in the right direction. And I want to encourage all. I appreciate the votes of every Democrat that supports that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I also see the hypocrisy of being for abortion and being for this resolution. Hey, let me ask you this, Dan. Have any of your Democrat colleagues, who are Arkansas Democrats, have they ever pulled you to the side or anything and off the record confessed man, I wish our party wasn't so pro-abortion? Has that ever happened to you? Because it's happened to me. I've talked with one who said, we just, but they don't want to say that publicly,
Well, I've had it happen with some Democrats, not with any legislators. Hey, Paul, I want to jump backwards just a second. I left out a point. One of the things this is Scope Week, and last week was,
yes.
All the opportunities we had in Scope Week to increase business, economic development. When we have these, and other states are using it, advanced practice nurses, people are leaving the state. These are high-paying jobs, leaving the state. So all of these scope bills that have been defeated by some of the wealthiest people in Arkansas are lobbying and killing these bills that would helping economic development, helping economic growth, and we can't pass them.
I know.
However, we have a quick action closing fund with millions of dollars in it to bring in companies from China and other places. But we can't get behind businesses in our own state to expand.
Yeah.
So things like that really frustrate me, and I wonder, why would we pass a tax increase and turn away jobs, or good-paying jobs, and we send those people to other states? That's a huge deal that I hope your listeners catch on to. The scope of practice is not just about medical issues. It's about economic development.
Yeah.
When we are sending people out of the state with high-paying jobs, and, you know, the people that have been for issue 1 are saying, well, we're turning doctors away. Doctors are going to other states. Well, folks, doctors in the state of Arkansas are sending advanced practice nurses out of the state. That's the reality of it. The medical society and the doctors are saying, we don't want these people practicing in Arkansas. We want them going to other states.
Yep.
And on the other hand, they'll turn around and say, well, we want to pass issue 1, so we'll bring doctors into the state. I find that very hypocritical to a huge extent here in the state of Arkansas.
We're out of time. State Representative Dan Sullivan, I appreciate it. Appreciate
Thanks,
the work
Paul.
you're doing. Okay, man, he's certainly one of the good guys, folks. And I know you can understand, you can tell that. What he's saying about scope of practice is extremely frustrating with me, too. The Public Health Committee is on lockdown, and they've got the numbers to where the Public Health Committee is controlled by the Medical Society. There are some freedom-minded individuals on that committee. There's just not enough to get past the Medical Society blockade on more freedom and more choice for consumers and professionals who just want to work the way they were trained to work.